Hello and welcome to episode 68 of the Dragons Are Real podcast. And I'm Pete Jones, your host for this evening. Well, for every show actually. Okay, this may sound hard to believe, but usually for my podcast episodes, I do a lot of research for doing my reviews. They're carefully scripted out and a lot of work goes on behind the scenes to make that 15-minute episode. This is not going to be one of those episodes. Today I'm sitting in my recording studio, also known as the conservatory, with my cup of double chocolate coffee. No script whatsoever. And today I'm going to be looking at the new ICRPG 2E Quickstarter. ICRPG is, of course, index card role-playing game. My much beloved game. In fact, if you were to say to me, Peter, I want you to throw all of your books away and just keep one system, which would it be? It would be ICRPG. I am a big fanboy. I don't do Patreons except one, and my Patreon is for Runehammer because I think old Hankrin Fennell really knocks it out of the park with his content, so that's the only Patreon I do. If you want to know more about ICRPG, I have done some past episodes. Episode 32, I give a review of the core rules. In episode 58, I looked at Blood and Snow. And at episode 59, I looked at the Bearcat setting, which, though strictly is not ICRPG fully, it can be used for it, but it's certainly in Hankrin's style. So today I'm going to be looking at the new 2E Quickstarter, which has just dropped, and I'll be going through that page by page. If you haven't guessed already, I am a huge ICRPG fanboy. So, excuse me if I gush through this, because I just loved it. In fact, when I set up this podcast, it was touch and go whether I would do a generic podcast or I would just solely concentrate on ICRPG. But at the time, the Murder Hobo show was exclusively ICRPG with Gary McCallum and Victor Diaz. I squashed that idea, and Gary, fuck you, you went and did a generic podcast in the end, so plah. I should have gone back and done it. Maybe I'll do an ICRPG one in the future solely for that. Who knows? So let's get on to the 2E Quickstarter. It's available for free for original purchases, and it's available for free from anybody on drive-through, and I will leave a link in the notes. So, ICRPG 2nd edition. Let's have a look at the old PDF and get into it. We start off with a quote. Find perfection in the imperfect. When need arises, create rather than seek. Open the beginner's mind. So we start off with an introduction to the new version. And basically, this is going to be a mod of ICRPG core system. If you want, you can use this as to completely mod your ICRPG, or you can take the bits out that you like from it, or stay as you are. You don't need to do anything. And the core of ICRPG is you roll a d20, you add a modifier, and you're trying to beat a target number. In the introduction, we have the Wizard's Lock, and the Wizard's Lock it's a mod that allows you to use ICRPG worlds as a gateway, so you can bring in all your monsters from your different worlds through the Wizard's Lock. So you can have warp shell characters in Alfheim by linking them through an energy portal. We can have cross-pollinate with our bioforms, which are now called life forms, and we can use our types. So basically, we can use any content from any of the worlds, just like you would in one of these TV episodes where we've got cross-pollination, then we can do this in ICRPG. So let's get on to it. As I said, it's a mod. So what are the tweaks that are included? Effort dice. There's been a slight change in effort dice where guns now have their own category, which comes in as a D8, and as a consequence, magic has been upgraded to a D10. It now introduces defenses. The stat supply has been upgraded, and there's new mods to how you can affect the target system and the timer system. So let's have a look and let's see where we're going with this. In the core system, it explains how the rules work. You've got your action only. You have where you stay where you are and you do something. You can move near and take an action, or you can move far, which is basically a double move. No changes with your checks. Your simple actions and attempts, those are carried over from the core rules. Same with targets. Targets are the same, hard and easy. No changes there. Basic effort remains at the D4. Weapon and tools now becomes the D6. So any sort of things like swords or hand weapons like that are a D6. If you're doing using tools like thieves' tools, that is your D6 for effort. Guns are now a D8. I think this was something that first came in through the game that I'm kind of struggle to remember. Yeah, Altered State. That's when we first saw this. So this is now official. I'll say official, a mod where we have D8 as your guns. Magic and energy has now been bumped up to a D10. So all your magic users will be happy out there. You've got a bit more power to you. And of course, ultimate remains at a D12. So the first sort of clarification that he's done in the rules is to do with movement and distance. So there's a nice graphic here. You have 3 ranges in ICRPG: close, near and far. Close is anything you can reach with your fingers. So it's toe-to-toe range, melee combat. You don't need to move to interact with things. Then we have near, which is a few hurried steps to get to near. So it's a few steps away. It's with reach of your long spear, and if you're playing on the tabletop game, it's about 6 inches or so. There's no exact focus, it's just that you can get there in a few steps. So the 25 feet and 50 feet rule has been binned. Far is somewhere that takes you several seconds to run, and it's basically as far as you can shoot with a basic bow shot, throw a baseball, or a challenging pistol shot. And if you want to move far on your turn, that's your entire turn to do so. And then anything beyond far is now out of range. You cannot shoot it because it's out of range. And if you want to move far away from something, you can get out of range of their shots. It's really simplified it. And those people who like clarifications will be more happy with that. Time for a slip for me coffee. Okay. Turns and rounds remain as they were. A turn being 10 seconds of action, and that's what a player does. When it's their turn, they take a turn, and a round is when every player on the table, including the GM, has had a turn. But it's now also codified that we can use free form. And some of us were doing this anyway, because as you know in ICRPG, it's a strict round the table. The players to the left takes a turn, and we proceed around the table in an orderly manner back to the GM and consider, just like a board game, we go round and round and round. This works really well online because once you set your order online, you can just, as GM, read through each one and everybody gets their turn. But when things aren't happening in combat, we can break out into free form, and most of us did this anyway. If it's not strict form and we're doing a bit of role play, then we do it free form. But for those people that liked it codified, it is down in black and white now. You can do free form. And now we have the first big change to the core. It's the dying roll. Yes, dying roll has been dropped from a D6 to a D4. That's right. You roll your D4 when you're at 0 hit points, and that's how many rounds you got, buddy. Not the old D6, it's a D4. So your friends had better help you quick to stabilize you, otherwise you are dead as a dodo. And I like this. It makes death a bit more important, a bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? A bit more exciting, because you've only got 4 rounds. So it's 4 rounds. So as I said before, if you're doing healing with tools, then you'll be rolling a D6. But of course, if you're doing magical healing, it's now a D10. So yeah, that's a big boost. No other changes for recovery. That is exactly the same. The hero coin. Yeah, you only get 1 hero coin, which has always been the case, but now it's in the front of the rules, not in the back of the GM section. And you can spend that hero coin at any time to re-roll any dice. It doesn't have to be just attempts. It can be effort as well. Or you can use your hero coin to add a D12 to any rolls. So if you roll your attempt and you're short off, then you can use, instead of re-rolling, use your hero coin to add a D12 roll to it to get that lovely target number. Or you can give your hero coin to another player at any other time. So some of the changes in here you can see has codified what some of us were doing already, but there are a lot of players on the Discord and the forums that don't like it too woolly with GMs and players having to make their own decisions. They want it written down in black and white, so Hank has delivered on that one. Then we're now up to page 21, and there is a trial scenario here called the Grey Hill Inferno. This is to show you how these things pop together. For new players, then lovely, lovely, lovely. Let's get on to the player's guide and how to create your heroes. And we've got big changes in this one. Oh yes, baby. So let's start off. Bioform has now been renamed as Lifeform. I suppose it makes a bit more sense, although does it make any difference? Probably not. Then you choose your type, and this is your class in any other game, and you write a one-line story about yourself before you get into stats. And now we get to the stats. Strength, Dex, Con, Int, Wisdom and Charisma, they remain the same, but now you assign 6 points in any of those stats as you see fit. Whereas 6 points to before was to attributes and to effort, now it's 6 points to your 6 core attributes. Nice and simple. Then we have effort, which is of course now basic, weapon, gun, magic and ultimate. You've now got 4 points to spend in those in any way you seem fit. Everybody's going to have 4 points in effort and 6 points in attributes. And then we get on to our hearts. It's the same as before. You start with 1 heart unless it's been modified by your life form. And then we get defense. So what is defense? So we get our, just as before, where our 6 main stats are made up of base points we put in and loot. Now we have a defense stat, which is you take what your con stat is and add all your defense from loot, like your armor, and this is your defense value. So if you've got a complete total of 5 points in your con stat, maybe 2 you put in base and 3 from loot, and you've got some armor, +2 armor, then you would add all that to 10 to get your new defense roll. So I like that. It's clarified that a bit more. I always found with new players putting points into things like armor and con not applying to it, they had trouble with that. So this makes a lot more sense. So your defense is 10 plus your con stat plus any loot. Nice and simple. And then here we have another new addition. This is mastery. And basically, anytime you roll a natural 20 on the table, you tick 1 point of mastery on your sheet. And when you've got 20 points of mastery, you have now become a master, and you get a master ability for your type of character for your class. And you reset your mastery points back to 0 and start again. And this can be done 3 times. So once you've got your 60 natural 20s in the game, you've got your 3 masteries and you ain't going to master anymore. So it's another way to reward players. And we'll come on to masteries and abilities shortly, because there's been some changes in that as well, which I think some of us were doing already, but again, it's codified it for players. Okay, abilities. So this is a new one. Whereas before in the ICRPG, you had your loot, and loot were a mixture of items you had and were abilities. Now abilities are separate, and you start with 1 ability from your type. And abilities cannot be taken from you. You've got them, and once you've got them, they're yours to keep. Unlike loot, which can be lost, gained and lost, abilities are now codified as such. Then we have our powers, which were first found in Vigilante City. And of course, you can create a superhuman in any world. So again, if you're using superhero characters, then you have 3 powers at level 1. And obviously you're going to need the Vigilante City for your powers. And then from Altered State, you've got your augments. And these are your implants that you find in Altered State. And then loot. We get into the loot section because ICRPG is all about loot. This is how your characters grow, is by getting loot. So you choose 1 starter loot from your character, your class type, and then we have 4 basic loot from the world that you're playing in. No change to your inventory. It's 10 carried items, 10 equipped items, but your abilities are now separate. And In black and white, carried items must be equipped to offer benefit. You can't just stick them in your backpack and hope that they help you. So then we got the player's guide, and there's a brief description then of Alfheim. I'm not going to go through it. And then we've got our life forms of Alfheim. So life forms now, they give some bonuses. So if you're a human, you get +1 int and +1 charisma. If you're a dwarf, you get +1 strength and +1 con. And beneath each of these, there's 4 bullet points with what you know, and maybe some things that help your character, you realise your character. We have elf, which is +1 dex and +1 charisma. We have tautons, think of mutant ninja turtles, which gain +1 con and +1 magic effort. We have gerblins, which are a bit like your goblins, which is +1 dex and +1 gun effort. And then we get on to the character types in Alfheim. We've got warrior, hunter, shadow, bard, mage, and priest. And all I'm going to do is just look at a warrior so that we can have a look at one, and then you can work out the rest for yourselves when you read the PDF. So you have your starting abilities. You get to choose one of those. The starting abilities for a warrior are Slayer, Defender, and Pit Fighter. So, for example, Defender, allies within close range of you may use your defense stat. So that's a really handy one. Standing next to one of your compadres, usually the magic user, and they get your defense when standing next to you. Then you've got your starting loot. You've got a choice of 3, and again you choose one. So you've got a weapon gem, shield glove, and battle standard. And then we've got our milestone abilities. So you've got Ever Stronger, Power Strike, Intervention, Endurance, Hurler, Revenge, and Berserk. For example, Berserk is spend 1d4 of your hit points to add an additional attack on your turn. And as I said, once you've got those milestones, they can't be taken off you. And then finally, we have the new mastery. Each type has got 3 new masteries. And for the warrior, you've got 3. You've got Slayer, Defender, and Pit Fighter. And for example, the Pit Fighter mastery, with any type of weapon, roll strength to hit and add strength to your effort roll. So as I said, each one of the types for Alfheim has got the same. And then there have been changes to the basic loot now. We have an Adventurer's Pack, Miner's Pack, Polar Pack, Fisherman's Satchel, Mender's Toolbox, Healer's Case, Climbing Gear, Mixed Armour Garb, Heavy Plate and Chain Armour, Common Shield, Iron Shield, and Traveller's Guard. And then the basic loot, there's been some slight changes in that. We've got Sword and Scabbard, Battle Axes and Harness, Spearman's Kit, Bow and Quiver, Crossbow and Bolt Kit, Warhammer, Great Sword, Knife Belt, Night Weapons Kit, Quarterstaff and Wraps, Exotic Weaponry, and Maps. And I'm not going to go through those. Then we have 2 pages of Intelligence Spells, 2 pages of Wisdom Spells. Then we've got the Player's Guide for Warp Shell. And the life forms we got in Warp Shell are Geno, +2 to any one stat, Azil, +1 Wisdom, Innate Create Device. We have Reptoid, who has claw weapons and walks on any surface. We've got a Kit, which is +2 Dex, a Mecha, which is +1 Heart, Ghost Armour, which is +2 Defense and 1 Ghost Abilities. And the character types in Warp Shell are Pilot, Gunner, a Mechanic, a Navigator, a Scientist, and an Echo. And just like in Alfheim, we've got new Warp Shell basic loot and new Warp Shell weapons. So that takes us up to page 68. We've got the GM Innovations section. And I have to say that Summer Hank's GM tips are really good. So let's get on to it. Chosen targets. These have now been reduced to targets of 10, 12, 15 or 18. Those are the only chosen target numbers in this mod that we're going to be using. So you've got a choice of 4 now. 10 is your beginner encounters. Target 12 is the sort of the average target, which is used in most encounters. 15 for a group with experience or good gear, or if there's rough conditions. And target 8 is your almost impossible ones. So it's going to be brutal. So those are your target numbers now. Once you have the chosen targets, we now introduce something new called target damage. And this is a term in how players can reduce the current target number of every roll to make it a bit easier. Some of the new abilities in the rules mention how a player can inflict target damage, but it can also be custom cases to fit your scene. And the example given is that as GM you choose a target of 15 in the catacombs, but one of the heroes has a torch with him, and you can say that this reduces the target by 1 for everybody that is within the torchlight. So as you create encounters, as GM, you can list ways of how they can reduce that damage that target number to bring it down a bit. And there's some target examples here. There's Tremors, which is target 10, Magma Rock, target 12, Psychic Disruption, target 15, and Swarm as target 18. So let's give an example of Tremors. The battlefield in this encounter shakes violently, making even simple tests challenging. Each round, add 1d6 to the base target of 10, thereby selecting a random target each round between 10 and 16. Players can reduce the target with ropes, spike boots, earth magic, or levitation. Enemies can increase the target with seismic slams or volcanic abilities. No matter what, reset and re-roll the target each round. Next new GM innovation, level timers. So timers is probably one of the rules that Hank brought in that people have transposed to a lot of the other games. Basically, as a GM, you roll a d4, and in that many rounds, something is going to happen. And it gives the players a bit more urgency to get things done. And what you can do now with timers is that you can have a world timer. You might use a different dice. So you have a world timer set on 12, and in 12 rounds, something big in the world is going to happen. And if you think back to the Aliens one, I've used this where we've had a reactor about to explode, set the world timer, and that starts counting down as well as local timers. Another new one is instead of having a round timer, have a turn timer. Oh yes, this was brutal. So after each player's turn, the timer marker is reduced by 1. So, that is going to be brutal. So, as he says, use that sparingly. We have a static death timer. So instead of rolling your d4 for dying, then you simply have a set number of rounds to get heal, stabilize, or you're dead. And also, he's added reload and recharge. So if you've got a weapon or an item that needs recharging, use a d4 to say how many rounds it takes to reload or recharge. And a lot of this stuff, I think some of us GMs were using anyway because we were adding it to it. But again, it's written down here now for those GMs that need help with this sort of stuff. It's in here. Obviously, you've got your effort substitute. So instead of rolling effort each round until you beat the heart number, you can roll a d4 and say, right, you've got to work on that for d4 rounds before you can open the door. So another great one. And not only did we have target damage, but we now have timer damage. And this is a way that players can increase the timer to stop it counting down. So, for example, if in 3 rounds a cabin is going to burn to the ground and a player uses extinguisher on it, you may add a round for each turn that they trying to douse the flames out to stop it. Or if there's a portal trying to open, it's going to open in d4 rounds, you might spend magical effort to try and bring that timer down so that it opens quicker. So some great ideas on there. Next we come into the new defense roll. And as Hank says in these notes, in the past, if there's some boulders flying down a hill, the GM would say, right, make a dex roll to see if you jump out of the way. But this didn't really reward players that had invested in the armour. So now you can make a defence roll instead. And some examples here is that if you've got a creature that does automatic hit attacks, then you can get the player that's invested in armour to do a defence roll instead. So you roll your d20 and you add your defense value, and that is your defense roll. And other things that you can use your defense roll for is for likes of shrapnel. So if a shrapnel goes off, you can demand that everybody within the blast area makes a defense roll to see if they avoid the damage. And obviously the players that have invested in their armour and the defence, then this gives them some benefits. I mean, you can say to players, either make a defence roll if you're jumping out of the way, if you're trying to absorb it in your armour, or a dex roll if you're trying to jump out of the way. So it opens it up there for the GMs and for the players. And as the GM giveth, the GM also taketh away, damaging defences. And it mentions that try and erode players' equipment by decreasing their defence stat. So you might have acid corrosion, which renders their armour useless and lowers the defence. You might have massive damage, that if a player takes over 20 damage in a hit, that some of the armour is damaged by the attack. So ways to also knock it down as well. So, yep. And then on the last page, page 81, we get to the new character sheet, which takes into account all of the new rules. So what are my thoughts on ICRPG 2e Quickstarter? I absolutely love it. Some great ideas in there. And with them all being mods, you don't have to embrace all of the ideas in there. Although I think for my games going forward, I'm certainly going to be taking a chunk of those. I know I had just finished doing the character sheet in Foundry VTT for ICRPG to include sort of Vigilante City, and now last night I've had to start reorganising again because I'm going to things like defence, and the new dying roll, I've got to get that in there. So, and life forms change, and so I've already started work on that. So I'm going to be up and running soon as. So if you want to check ICRPG 2e Quickstarter, as I said, there's a link in the show notes. For more information about this podcast, check out the website at petejones.neocities.org. Send me a voicemail via the Anchor app, or you can send voicemails and emails to dragonsarealpodcast@pm.me. All of these links are in the show notes and on the website. And that's all for this episode. I'll see you all on the flip side.